it's an immediate impact. The moment that we breathe consciously rather than automatically, we're activating the neocortex and the limbic brain, whereas usually our breathing is coming just from the brain stem. And as soon as we start activating the neocortex and the limbic brain with our breathing, we're opening up the possibility for global neural coherence, which I think really is what happens in a state of flow. One of the most exciting horizons and edges for me about conscious breathing is that
Most of us take about 20,000 breaths a day, and yet almost no one has ever been taught how to breathe consciously. Today's guest has spent more than 4 decades teaching something simple, yet profoundly powerful. Take the breath that can transform the way we think, feel, and live. Today, we're exploring the connection between breath, awareness, healing, and transformation. Welcome back to the Perpetual Growth Podcast, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and human stories that help you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your life. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Now, before we dive in, quick ask. If you enjoy these conversations, please follow the show, share the episode with someone who you think would benefit from it, and leave a review. It helps us continue bringing thoughtful guests and meaningful conversations to the show. Today's guest has spent over 40 years guiding people through deep personal transformation. Jessica Dibb is the founding director of Inspirational Consciousness School and Community, an organization dedicated to supporting personal, relational, and planetary wellness. She's also the author of Breathwork and Psychotherapy, Clinical Applications for Healing and Transformation, and a founding co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance. Through immersive programs, teachings, and experiential practices, Jessica has helped thousands of individuals explore how conscious breathing can support emotional healing, expanded awareness, and personal transformation. Her work integrates psychology, breathwork, and contemplative traditions to help people reconnect with their deeper presence and potential. Today, we're going to explore the power of conscious breathing, how breath affects emotional and psychological well-being, why presence matters more than ever in a fast-moving world, and how breath can become a powerful tool for personal growth. Jessica, welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Zach. And it's really an honor. I have a lot of respect for the gift that you're giving the world through your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Jessica, I always love starting here because I believe it gives insights into how someone approaches life. I mean, what does growth mean to you right now in this season of your life?
Mm. I really believe that I not only believe, it's my experience working with people that physiologically we are born wired to breathe. And so the most compelling physiological process that we have is breathing in terms of transformation, maintenance, growth, and all of that. And we're also born wired to love. We will love our parents, even if they can't love us very well. We're
Mhm.
born wired to connect. So for me, growth is cultivating my capacity to be love in every moment. And conscious breathing has turned out to be, of all the practices that I've ever done and continue to do, the most immediate way to recall myself to that growth every moment.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I'm curious about is after more than 4 decades of guiding transformation work, I mean, how has your own understanding of growth evolved?
I think that when I was younger, I had a sense of the way that a person would be if they grew. It's sort of like they'd have all these different characteristics that were probably a projection of what I wanted in the world and how I wanted people to be. And some of that, of course, rings true because there are universal things we would all like for everybody, like love, like compassion, like creativity. But what I've learned is that every human being is a unique manifestation of the creative life force, and they're going to make contributions that nobody else can make. So my work with myself and my work with others supporting them is really at this point to tap into their potential exactly as it is, and then help them develop the pathways, neurological pathways, physiological pathways, philosophical pathways, emotional pathways that allow those gifts to flower and be given to the world. And so I would say that I went from a sort of fixed picture of what growth looks like to a very supportive, organic support of the growth in each individual.
Yeah, because it is very much individual. And I love that you said, and I don't recall exactly how you just said it, but so much of our beliefs, life experiences, I mean, our own a projection of our own expectations of how things should be. But we all have a different model of the world.
Mhm.
And it's important to be able to take that step back and become more consciously aware of everybody is on their own independent journey. And of course, there's that coming together, the synergies, and there's also the divergence in paths. And it is a very fascinating journey. I mean, so one thing I'm curious about, Jessica, is breathing is something we all do automatically, right?
Mhm.
Yet you've devoted much of your life to teaching conscious breathing.
Mhm.
So why is breath, in your mind, so central to the human experience?
Well, of course, it is central to the human experience physiologically. It's literally the primary thing that we need to be able to do to live.
Hmm.
And in addition to that, ancient wisdom is matching all of the research that's coming out from brain science and neuroscience about breathing, that probably the fastest way that we can transform and change our physiological and emotional state is through breathing. It's an immediate impact. The moment that we that we breathe consciously rather than automatically, we're activating the neocortex and the limbic brain, whereas usually our breathing is coming just from the brain stem. And as soon as we start activating the neocortex and the limbic brain with our breathing, since the respiratory circuits seem to be embedded almost everywhere in the brain, we're opening up the possibility for global neural coherence, which I think really is what happens in a state of flow. And so one of the most exciting horizons and edges for me about conscious breathing is that, whereas, Csikszentmihalyi and all these people that have come after him that have studied the state of flow show that there's that initial needing to kind of be disciplined and go against a little bit of inertia, then you enter a state of flow. Then there's also the coming down and there's the integration. The thing that about almost every practice where you enter a state of flow, be it meditation, art, extreme sports, gambling, whatever, even the stuff that is not so healthy for you, those activities all have to come to an end, and there has to be a period of integration. The thing that doesn't have to come to an end, the only activity that I can think of, is breathing. So I think that once a person develops an appreciative relationship, a friendship, an intimate relationship with their breathing, which I think you can do just by committing to do 7 minutes of conscious breathing a day. I think after a month, even after a week, you feel the change. After a month, you are developing such an intimate relationship that even when you're not consciously breathing every breath, you're so aware when your breath is getting held, retained, shallower, faster, more anxious. You have so much connection with your breath that I think you can actually live in a state of flow where most of the time you're meeting each moment from a place of conscious presence, from a place of global neural coherence, which gives you greater access to all of your resources, your emotional resources, physical, cognitive, spiritual, and you can respond to the vicissitudes of life with a greater flexibility and creativity, and probably enter each moment with doing things that you would not have been able to do from a more ordinary place or automatic place of consciousness. So, this is why for me, I have just seen that conscious breathing is a game changer. It's literally a force multiplier for
Hmm.
people. And honestly, it may sound ridiculous, but just 7 minutes a day, you're going to start to feel those changes in a week, and in a month, it's going to start exponentially increasing. After 90 days, it's extraordinary.
I th I have so many questions right now. I mean, you said so many, there were so many amazing takeaways and tangible moments in what you just shared. I mean, one of the things that really stood out was the fact that you just said, and if I heard you correctly, one of your beliefs is that we actually have the ability to live in a state of flow as opposed to it being something that's transient that we enter into and out of when we're being bombarded by all the things in the environment. So,
Yeah.
but becoming more conscious, utilizing the power of the breath, this can become more of a constant state. And one of the things I love about it is you can break this down in biblical terms and the standpoint of quantum physics and across so many contexts. When
Mhm.
we're in flow, we have the opportunity to tap into more what I would label as, not to put, I hate putting labels on things, but limitless potential.
Mhm.
You know, we have the ability to access resources that we would not have otherwise accessed, and we're in a more heightened state.
Mhm.
Now, one thing that I can think about this across different contexts, like with my younger kids. I have a 6-year old, 9-year old, 17-year old. The 6-year old right now very much enters into some very heightened states, I will say. And the first thing that I observe in every instance is the,
Mhm.
and I'm like, honey, I want you to take a deep breath. Slow down. I'll try to hold her. She's not pushing me away and say, let's work on her breath first. I need you to slow yourself down because I know she's immediately triggering that autonomous nervous system and going into that fight or flight state. And I'm like, we can never make good decisions from this place. We've got to slow down the breathing first. I mean, another great example is, I think back to the first time that I got into an ice bath.
Mhm.
And, my nervous system was freaking out. It's like, what are you doing in this water? And it was probably the better part of the whole 3, 4, 5 minutes, whatever it was that I was in, that all I was doing was focusing on my breathing, but still wasn't in control. And you compare and contrast that to now, and I hop into an ice bath, and it's a matter of 10, 15, 20 seconds where I can now calm the nervous system. And
Mhm.
all of it is through the power of breath. I
Mhm.
mean, what is it? And you spoke to this a little bit, and I don't want to glaze over it. Bring us back to what happens physiologically and psychologically when we become aware of the breath. I mean, I already heard you talk about the difference between, the breathing from the brain stem, autonomous, versus the neocortex,
Mhm.
conscious, and then we become more grounded and present. Is there anything else that you would
Mhm.
add to that?
Sure. Well, first of all, your daughter is very lucky. What a good father. That's wonderful that you're helping her have that tool that she will always have throughout her life when she uses it. Um, so there's a very important part about breathing consciously, which is not only are we now having a connection between the automatic brainstem breathing and the neocortex making a decision, but we're making the decision to breathe consciously for a reason. There's a value to it. We might know that we're anxious and we need to calm down. We might know that we're in a moment when we want to bring our best self to something that we're about to do. So we're gathering and marshaling all our forces. So we're also activating the limbic brain, which is the emotional brain. And it's the lining up of the cognitive neocortex, the limbic emotional, and the physical automatic part of our physiology that is so potent because it means so often what happens, even if you look at it from like a deep psychological perspective, like a Jungian perspective, is that the shadow will drop, will kind of hide out in our thinking function, feeling function, sensation function, or intuition. This is what Jung showed. He said that if we were lucky, by the time we were in midlife, something would have brought us to our knees. We would be so crushed by some experience that we would be forced to use the function where our shadow usually hangs out, the most repressed function. When you breathe consciously, you're automatically bringing all those things into the equation. So you have such access to resources that you wouldn't ordinarily have. We know Jack Feldman at UCLA, who's probably considered at this point the top scientist for breathing physiology on the planet, having discovered in the brainstem what he called the pre-Botzinger complex, which is a rhythm generator that initiates breathing. He says it's beyond dispute scientifically at this point that every single breath is psychophysiological. And so that means that every time we breathe, our physical state is informing the quality of that breath, and our psychological state is informing it. And the way that we breathe is then affecting our physiological state and our emotional state. Think of the power of that. Every breath is psychophysiological. So bringing any kind of awareness, let alone any sense of knowledge about what it could be doing, let alone the willingness to learn to be present with whatever emotion we may be feeling, whatever internal state. It's cold, like you were doing ice bath, it's hot. There's another ritual that happens in very advanced yogic traditions called the five fires, where you sit in a desert with a fire before you, a fire behind you, a fire on either side, and the sun above. There's others where you're on glaciers. These are, ancient yogic techniques, not advising anybody to do them, but just to say that the power of being so present in a state of global neural coherence, likely a state of flow, and the fact that every single breath is impacting our ability to be present physically and emotionally. It's again just a game changer. It really, there's no faster way to become present.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it's such a simple but powerful tool. I mean, why, in your experience, and I know, my brain's immediately trying to answer the question. I mean, there's aspects that are, I believe the vast majority of it is pattern response and conditioning. But I mean, why do you believe most people overlook such a simple, not necessarily easy, but simple and incredibly powerful tool?
That is such a beautiful question, Zach, and it deserves a day-long seminar because there are so many different responses to that. I'm going to start with one of the most salient and really deep answers to it that's provocative, I think. Um, to the extent that we are not empowered, to the extent that we have lost or lessened our connection with, let's just call it right now, the creative life force. Let's just call it creation or the force, if you will. And some people, of course, would call it the divine or God or love or quantum, quantum energy. Whatever it is that you call that thing that's somehow making all of this happen, it doesn't have to be theistic at all. To the extent that we have felt that connection severed, which I think happens for people somewhere between conception and shortly after birth. It depends on the situation, or it could be happening in early childhood for some people that manage to have an amazing conception and in utero experience in birth. It might be that their parents are even amazing, but the world the world consciousness, shall we say, is not yet at the quality of presence and love and wisdom. So somewhere along the way, we lose the sense that we are organically connected with that creative life force and it's always with us. And to that extent, we will actually feel compelled to look outside of ourselves for what feels missing. We'll feel compelled, like, because we've lost the sense that it, as Rumi said, what, how can you die of thirst when the river runs right through your own yard? But when we've lost that, we're looking outside of ourselves. So it actually feels scary or maybe hard or challenging to connect with this thing that's right inside of ourselves and that is about inner mastery rather than going to an outer master. And I think psychologically, that's actually one of the reasons that most of us don't avail ourselves of the power of this great treasure chest that is right inside of our own chest, this great medicine chest. Taking a pill, having an acupuncture needle put in us. I mean, these are all wonderful modalities. I've had to take pills in my life. I've had acupuncture and I've worked with masters and it's been amazing. But you really have to go into a state of deep self love and trust and willingness to get the full power of breath work. Many people actually practice it kind of like, well, I'm having this problem, so let me do this. Or I want to feel a little bit better today, so I'll do breath work for a few minutes. But to enter that state where it would be, it's with us all the time and we're plugged into that quantum state that you talked about, that takes awakening. It takes devotion and love and courage. And once we do it, why would we ever leave? But you asked what the difficulty was. Why do we overlook it? And I think it's a real shift in consciousness that needs to happen. I think that if each of us were born, though, and I dream about this kind of world where we were born into a world where our first breath was treated with utter reverence. We knew the importance of that memory of the first breath and the fact that that would be at the neural substrate and that of everything we would ever experience. And then everything else that we experienced would, whatever our breathing was doing, would be there. And so each breath was important, and that we were, in a sense, taught not only the power, but the language of breathing. We became fluent in it. I think if we lived in a world like that and we were born into a world like that, we wouldn't be frightened of it at all, or we wouldn't be ignoring it. We wouldn't be looking outside of ourselves. We would have the physiological experience of being connected to the creative life force all the time.
It's really interesting. I mean, as you're speaking, Jessica, like I'm trying to put myself in our listeners' shoes, obviously thinking through my own individual lens, so many different curiosities about your life story and life experience. And in my mind, it feels as though so much of what you said feels so visceral. And
Mhm.
like it's such a massive transformation going from being stuck in that responsive state that so many people are in environmentally to this complete integration and being from a place of love and breath. I mean, especially in today's world,
Mhm.
like where do you start with someone? I mean, but actually, maybe what could be powerful is, what kind of transformations have you witnessed through the power of breath work? And
Mhm.
maybe there's a story that stands out in your mind that is a great example of having gone that full
Mhm.
journey.
Mhm.
What might you share?
Yeah, thank you so much. So let me tell two quick in brief versions of two stories that will then illustrate a deeper point that you're asking. I'm thinking about a woman who I had the privilege of working with, who was a survivor of Auschwitz. She had gone into Auschwitz when she was a teenager, and she did survive. She was a very fearful woman. Her sons and her husband, who was also a survivor of Auschwitz, um, they lived with a lot of chronic anxiety. She didn't want her children to climb trees, to go out in the cold. She was so afraid of something happening to them. And her son had done breath work, and he eventually, after years, had her come see me. She had never been willing to open up to a therapist. She had never told her story about Auschwitz to anyone. She would not talk about what had happened there. She came into the room and said to me, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm only here to placate my son. We're just going to sit here for an hour and then I'm going to leave. And I said, okay. So then we would talk about her son, and whenever she would say something that was very loving or appreciative about her son that I also recognized, I would say, that's really beautiful. I love that about your son too. Could we just pause for a moment so I could feel that? And without saying that I was breathing, I would just breathe deeply. Well, mirror neurons we have, And so after about 20 minutes, whenever I would breathe deeply, she would breathe deeply. And then there came to be a point where we were doing 2 or 3 deep breaths at a time. And all I can tell you is, Zach, I got to hear the story of what happened to Alice Krauss in Auschwitz. She shared her whole story. We were there for 3 hours. It completely went underneath her fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or faint. Those are now all the ones that we talk about. Um, Below the default mode to a place of presence. And she entered a place of flow and trust and could share that. And when Steven Spielberg brought the Shoah Project to around the country, he was interviewing Holocaust survivors before he made Schindler's List. She was now able to share her story. Her story is still up on the website because she had felt that she could do it at that moment. I'm also thinking of a man I got to work with who was a notorious addict, pills and alcohol, and he had gotten sober primarily through doing breath work. He'd done a lot of breath work and consciousness work in our school, and he had 1 or 2 relapses over a 10-year period. They'd last very short time. And then all of a sudden, one day after 10 years, he was acting really crazy. I mean, he was talking to people in the air. He was muttering to himself. We thought he had, slipped and he was using again. But whenever we tested him, cornered him so he couldn't do anything to outwit us, there were no drugs of any kind, no alcohol of any kind, but his psychiatrist couldn't commit him because he wasn't a danger to himself or anybody else. So I brought him in to do a breathwork session. He hadn't done one for a couple of years. And I remember right before he breathed, I said, Michael, have you ever felt truly unconditionally loved? And he said, yes, I've absolutely felt unconditionally loved. And he was he was kind of in a state of psychosis. And so he laid down to breathe. And about 10 minutes into the breathing, he suddenly opened his eyes and said to me, you know what? I don't think I actually ever have felt unconditionally loved. And I can only tell you, Zach, that at that moment, the psychotic look that had been there for weeks in his eyes just disappeared. The glaze went away. He was back. He talked to me. He breathed some more. We integrated the material that he needed to integrate. And here is one of the most fascinating things about it. I had suspected that he had a vitamin B12 deficiency and a vitamin D deficiency because concomitant with everything else that was going on psychologically, he had no energy. He just felt like he could barely move. So I'd had him tested the day before, but the results hadn't come back yet. 3 days after our breathwork session, the results came back. He had almost no B12 in his system and almost no vitamin D, all things that could have triggered what are called the Schneiderian symptoms that he was exhibiting psychologically. But guess what? He shifted because of the breathwork session and he never went back into the psychosis. So he landed up getting D and B12, which helped his energy level, but the breath work took him out of the psychosis, even though his vitamin deficiencies are probably what triggered the state that he was in. Now, that just gives you, those are two examples, extreme examples, but I could give you hundreds of examples of people who are caught in psychological or physiological states that are not shifting. And because they connect with their breathing, that brings them into a state of presence that is beneath their stories and their narratives, and is also that neural substrate of breathing before all these defense mechanisms have built up. They're able to remember something that's very essential about themselves, which is that our primary nature is love. Our primary nature wants to connect, and that can make a profound difference physiologically and psychologically. And to get back to the very beginning of your question, where do you begin? What is something that people can do? I've probably said to people thousands of times in my life, take a deep breath. Now, taking a deep breath is very powerful. You say it to your daughter, it will absolutely change the state that you've been in before. And I don't say it anymore. What I say to people is breathe deeply, or I say receive your breath, or even deeper, I invite people to realize that they are being breathed, and then that they could allow themselves to be breathed even deeper. And my experience is that that connects them faster and more profoundly with the state of our original consciousness of, we're born wired to breathe and to love, is to have this realization, wait, I've been being breathed all along. I don't even, it's not that I have to take a deep breath. I have to allow this thing that's already happening to me to happen even more deeply, receiving breathing as opposed to taking a deep breath. And I think that is such a profound orientation shift for people, that then any breathwork practice they do where they're using counting or ratios or prolonged exhalations or faster, breathing, or breathing through the nose or breathing through the mouth, or any of the therapeutic things that we know that can make a difference. If it starts with this foundation of actually experiencing the effortlessness in the fact that we're being breathed, then I think people can enter that state of flow of breathing better, because they're not feeling breath work as effort. They're feeling breath work as receiving something.
That is a fascinating shift in perspective. Now, Jessica, I want to pause here and bring this to and try and maybe expand upon what you just said and bring something practical for the listeners. Like if someone listening right now is feeling overwhelmed or stressed or disconnected, you talked about receiving breath. What is one simple practice they could try today to become more present and grounded? And maybe that's the foundation, awareness of receiving breath as opposed to taking. What would you suggest next?
Okay, so yeah, I do think that that fundamental shift is important. And I do want to mention for people that might be listening who might have a, a very intense history with trauma. I just really want to acknowledge those people where sometimes breathing or the sound of breathing can be part of their trauma because they might have heard someone's breathing close to their ear, or they
Mm,
might have felt like their own breathing was at risk, like
mm, mhm.
and I just want to honor those people and say that if even the notion of receiving breathing, even though it's so much more peaceful, but just any kind of breath work is hard for you, the thing I would suggest that you do first is to just sing or hum. Maybe a childhood song that had some meaning to you, or maybe a song that your favorite musical artist, just sing a little bit and let yourself feel how you're being breathed by singing. And that will gently help you get into being able to just focus on the breathing without feeling traumatized in any way. And,
Beautiful suggestion. Thank you. Mm,
and for everyone else, so yes, let me just give 3 or 4 very simple things.
please.
Can you allow yourself right now to not need to change your breathing? Let's say you're feeling anxious, or let's say you're about to go into a meeting and you need to be at your best to bring an idea or to offer a contribution or to get a job or whatever it may be. Or maybe you're about to enter a conversation with your significant other and you're scared because there's tension between you and love is important and you don't want to be rejected, or anything else that you can imagine that would create stress or a need for energy. So the first thing would be, without putting any effort into it, can you just feel how something is breathing you? It always has been, and it always will be while you're here on this planet. Now, as you're experiencing that, what would happen if you let yourself be breathed just a little deeper without effort? Don't put any effort into it yet. Just let yourself be breathed a little deeper. Now, is it possible for you to inhale? You may already be doing this. Is it possible for you to inhale through your nose as opposed to your mouth? And is it possible for you when you breathe out to just open your mouth very slightly, even if you're around people, and relax your throat and your jaw and let the breath come out through your mouth? If you can feel how you're being breathed, and if you can let yourself be breathed a little deeper, and then you can inhale through your nose where you're going to get more nitric oxide released, which helps your lungs open up more. And you can breathe out through the mouth like a sigh. We know that there's a very important physiological function to sighing. In fact, they now make sure when people are on respirators that about every fifth breath is a deeper exhale, like a little bit of a sigh. You're already now not only oxygenating yourself better, but you have prevented yourself from over breathing, which can happen when you're in an anxious state. And then even when you do breath work, you're sort of breathing too deeply or too fast in a way that creates some not very comfortable physiological effects. So you're preventing that from happening. And you're inviting a stimulation of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest, go with the flow part of your nervous system by the sighing. If you can do that, you've already changed your state enough that now you might be able to consciously and intentionally breathe deeper. Just really invite yourself to breathe deeply, but it won't create more anxiety and it won't be effortful. And that would be my initial offering of what a person can do right now that is going to both reduce their anxiety, elevate their mood, and also give them more energy for whatever the task is that they might need to do, but also give you access to more of your emotional, cognitive, and physical resources.
Hmm. It's amazing. It's so simple and so powerful. What I find really curious about this conversation, I'm a firm believer, and I'm just going to use this very polarizing example, but smokers.
Mm,
The irony with a smoker, as I believe, and second to the addictive elements of the nicotine, one of the gifts that they are giving themselves in that moment
absolutely.
is actually breath.
I
Now,
know.
we're breathing toxins in, which is part of the problem. But the thing that's been unrealized is for the first time in that day, or at least in those moments, that's actually some of the most conscious breathing they are doing all day long.
Absolutely. And we have noted that, many breath workers have noted that. I
Mhm.
mean, really deep breaths that people take sometimes when they're doing
Yes.
when they're smoking nicotine.
Yeah.
And that it probably is on some level. I mean, a lot of them describe that they just feel more relaxed afterwards.
Hmm.
And it might be partially the nicotine, but I doubt it. I think what it is it's really just the act of breathing. In fact, there was a study done. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to cite it properly so that people would probably be able to look it up. But
Yeah.
there was a study done where people breathed air that was of a healthier quality and people breathed air that was of an unhealthier quality. And it didn't matter in terms of their relaxation levels later. You would think that it would, but it was the actual act of breathing that made the difference for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Jessica, I cannot believe how the time has flown through this interview. Now, as we wrap up today's episode, I would love to bring the audience back to something that you offer that I think, from for myself firsthand, experientially, is have been the most transformative experiences of my life. It's and what I'd love to hear you speak to is the difference between why experiential work is often more powerful than purely intellectual learning. Like I always say, it's one thing to understand something intellectually. It's a whole other thing to apply it practically, and it's a whole nother thing to actually have mastered those skills to where we do it without conscious thought. What could you talk about in your mind's eye the power of the immersive experiences you offer and what type of experiences people commonly have through those programs?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, first of all, we know that embodiment is a word that's going around our planet a lot. Embodied learning, embodied education, because we now do have the science that shows us that so much of our memory, our implicit and explicit memory, is actually encoded in our muscles. And
Mhm.
so you have these wonderful books like, Candace Pert many years ago, writing the book Molecules of Emotion, Bessel van der Kolk talking about trauma, and he wrote the book The Body Keeps the Score. I mean, I could go on and on. There's just so many. Dr. Dan Siegel talks about the fact that the mind is not the brain. It's an embodied relational flow of energy and information. That's what awareness is itself. I saw another paper that came out of Canada about that literally just this morning. That was really fascinating. So we really do understand now that experience that is not embodied is not integrated. You
Hmm.
know, it's compartmentalized somewhere. And
Hmm.
it can get us into a very, these little cul-de-sac loops in our mind that we can't get out of. The way to really change a pattern, like a person playing tennis or doing piano or art or whatever, is to have a fully embodied experience. So we need to have fully embodied experiences of learning, of relationship, of the way that we relate. Eye contact when we're talking to our partners makes an incredible difference. Holding hands, that kind of thing. So that is what is so one of the things that is so powerful about breath work or breathing or conscious breathing is that you are immediately invoking an embodied experience. So now you're feeling, let's say, anger. And I don't say breathe into the anger anymore because we don't want to make the anger more powerful. I say invite the anger to breathe with you. Now you're feeling grief. Like for instance, my father, I was extremely close to him and he lived with me for the last 9 years of his life. I was very lucky, lived to the age of 99. The doctor said the breathing exercises had a lot to do with it. But it was a real soul connection and I was really grieving. And I found that everything I've ever taught people really worked, that if I invited the grief to breathe, it opened up places of presence to my relationship with him that helped me experience an embodied sense of the value of him with me, whether he was in form or whether he was formless. If you're having experiences of confusion, fear, hatred, love, joy, wanting, hope, any of these things, you learn, and then again, cold, hot, needing to rush, having a peaceful time. You invite yourself to breathe in the presence of all of these things, and you find out what are the deeper potentials that you have to contribute to each moment rather than reacting just sort of automatically. I mean, it's again, I keep using the word game changer and force multiplier, but it really is.
Oh, it is. I hear that completely. Now, Jessica, for our listeners who want to learn more about your work, your book, or the programs that you offer, where can they find you and connect with your community?
Thank you for asking that question, Zach, because you did ask a question a few minutes ago that I didn't answer. What are the
That's
kinds of experiences people have?
okay.
So I do want to just say that there is a level of breath work that has to do with tapping into the deepest potential that any of us have. And in that level of breath work, we do have expanded states of consciousness. We have a couple of studies now that are rudimentary, but they're on the way coming through that, these kinds of expanded states of consciousness through breath work are equivalent, if not more than, what can happen with psychedelics, but
Mhm.
without the side effects, right? So
Yeah.
and you can keep doing it instead of the psychedelic wearing off. So
Yeah.
we have these programs like Awakening, which we offer in an 8-week version with a weekend retreat, and we offer it in an 8-day immersion. And in during those programs, people are going to go through um, a review of sort of their different capacities around empowerment, presence, communication, intimacy. And I mean intimacy on,
Mhm.
emotional levels, sexual levels, spiritual levels, intuition, creativity, growth and healing. How do you access the inner healer? How do you motivate your stem cells to go? But also just the sense of, the archetypal healer inside of yourself. So we go through all of these different levels of human experience with presence, with wisdom, with love, with conscious breathing. People heal things all the way back to their conception, their birth, their childhood, something that happened yesterday. People open up their capacities for compassion, for power, for focus, for energy, for wisdom that they didn't even know they had. And we use breath work and movement and inner inquiry and meditation, and these are very immersive programs. So we have those coming up. Awakening, we offer it in the 8-week version and in the 8-day version several times a year. And then we have a curriculum that goes on beyond that, where we work with people to integrate the experiences that they're having into their daily life. We help them cultivate the capacity to be present to others' suffering, to be present to others' potential, and to be a force for helping people awaken those things in their own life. And ultimately, we offer a program that trains people to be breath workers, to be psycho-spiritual facilitators. It's a pretty rigorous program. I am the co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance, and our program sort of exceeds even those standards because I do think that humanity is at a pivotal time and we need to awaken consciousness at a level that has not been known by many people up until this time. So we really go quite deep in those programs. Yeah. And
Beautiful.
so if people want to get in touch with me or about that school, Inspiration Consciousness School, they can go to inspirationcommunity.org, inspirationcommunity.org. And the book is available on Amazon, Breathwork and Psychotherapy, Clinical Applications for Healing and Transformation. And it talks about all the things we've been talking about and much more. And I will also give you a coupon. I'll send you a coupon that you can put up for your listeners for 20% off from the publisher for that book if they want that.
Oh, beautiful. That's an amazing gift. Thank you. And I'll make sure for our listeners that we have everything available, all the links in the show notes. But Jessica, this has been a very meaningful conversation. I mean, one of the things I appreciate most about this topic is how it reminds us that sometimes the most powerful tools for transformation are also the simplest.
Mhm.
Breathing, presence, awareness. These are things available to all of us, yet often overlooked in busy lives. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today. And to everyone listening, if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. Follow the show so you never miss an episode. And remember, growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Thank you for listening to the Perpetual Growth Podcast. And Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today.